Blessed be everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I wanted to share some quotes of Yoda that are pertinent to the shadow work journey, and I also wanted to share a shadow work journey that I've very recently been on, just to give you an example of how the ego works and how it likes to dance around and do what it does, and different ways that we can work with it when it does that. So stay tuned for that. If you don't know who I am, I'm Sandra from mysterywitchschool.com, author of Crafting Your Wiccan Path. And if you want to know more about Wicca and witchcraft, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss any videos. And if you want to know where to start your witchcraft practice but you're not sure, then take a look at my free video. It is called How to Start Your Witchcraft Practice. The link is in the description field below this video. This video is not going to be an easy video to do because it's just a shadow work video, but it's a shadow work video to give you a demonstration of shadow work in action, I guess, because a lot of people do ask me how do I start shadow work? What do I do? And life throws us opportunities all the time to engage in shadow work. It's just knowing how to do it, and unless you have an example of how you can do it, it's still difficult to know what to do. So I'm giving you a real world example of a shadow work process that I've recently been engaged in and is still to some extent engaged in. And just, I guess, a story about how I managed this situation from a more shadow work perspective. It's going to be probably a long video, and there may be places in it where there's a lot more edits because I do need to be more considered with what I say, because I don't want to be perpetuating the negativity, because that's not the point. The point is to use anything that comes one's way as food for growth, as food for self-knowledge, as food for know thyself. And hopefully in doing that, leading a much more peaceful life. Yoda comes into it because Yoda, also the quotes of Yoda came along at the same time, so I felt that the two of them did go very, very well together. And I'm going to start the whole process off with a quote from Yoda. So, the quote is, "Fear is the path to the dark. Fear tends to anger. Anger tends to hate, and hate tends to suffering." And boy, oh boy, does it ever. You could almost shorten that quote to fear leads to suffering. And fear isn't necessarily always about our physical safety. Fear can be about us feeling not good enough, being afraid of not being good enough, being afraid of not being taken seriously, being afraid of not being respected. And usually all of those things boil back down to, I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable. You know, they all seem to always have this common core there. And the shadow work is a way to work with that so that you can start to feel more worthy and more lovable and more loved, and respect yourself to the extent that you no longer have to try and get that from outside sources. So what happened this week for me with the shadow work was that I received an email from somebody who has philosophical differences to myself, so to say. Which is fine. The philosophical differences aren't really the issue, seriously. They're just differences of opinion. And that's pretty much it, so it's no big deal. But the way that it was handled and the way that the email was written, the tone of the email, was where the juice was. So it wasn't necessarily what the email's so much about, although that is also a topic to talk about too, because it's something that comes up a lot in not just Wicca, but also in other religions as well. We've certainly seen it around the world. But more to do with the delivery of the disagreement and the food in that for me to see my own shadow in this and how I went about the process. So basically speaking, this person doesn't approve of the way that I teach Wicca, or that the fact that I even use the term Wicca. And to give you context of the energy in this email, I'm going to read it to you, and then I'm going to talk about what I got from it and how I worked with it. Okay. Please do not take any of this personally if you resonate with any of this yourself. This is not meant to be harmful in any way. It's an opportunity to look at the reaction to the email and seeing what the reaction to the email is bringing up. Because it's the reaction to the email and the emotions and the thoughts and the yep, ego, that is the thing we want to work with, not the actual email itself, if that makes sense. So, I have no question. I have a statement. You're not teaching Wicca. And you know that. I strongly encourage you to lose the Wicca, in quotation marks, name, and teach witchcraft. Because we both know that you don't need to be Wiccan to be a witch. But if you continue to use the name of the religion in which I and many like me are clergy who lead legitimate covens, you're not going to continue to enjoy a good reputation. There is no need to mislead people about Wicca to teach witchcraft. Please consider my suggestions, which I lead in good faith. Now, none of that is in good faith. That's not the type of email somebody who claims to be clergy should be writing. Because somebody who's at that level of authority and practice should know better and understand themselves more. So that's the only comment I'm going to make about that email. What I want to do now is mine it for the juice for how it can help me in my work. So when I read the email, my ego went into an absolute tizzy because it felt threatened, actually. It felt threatened particularly by the statement of, you're going to lose your good reputation if you continue doing what you're doing. And my ego took that as a threat. And whether it was meant as a threat, I don't know. My ego took it that way anyway. So at first, that's all the ego saw was threat, warning, we're threatened, we're being threatened. And then the other things started to come out after that. The arrogance in the tone of the email, the presumptuousness, the condescending tone, and the self-righteousness all came out in that very short email. And so, because I reacted to it, but I also knew not to respond, because the universe had also told me very clearly, just before I actually looked at the email, to stay out of it, literally. I said, okay, ego, write a response. However you want to write it, just go for it. So my ego wrote a response. It was very proud of itself, felt really good, felt self-righteous, it felt arrogant, it felt condescending enough. It felt all of those things. It got to have its day of doing exactly the same thing that the person had done in their email. And so what that, of course, showed me when I saw it was, hey, I'm accusing this person of arrogance. There's my arrogance. Being condescending. Hey, look, I'm the queen of condescension here. I'm doing a great job here. Then the other one was being presumptuous. So I was also being presumptuous. And then the self-righteousness. And of course, I was being totally self-righteous. So I got to have a laugh at myself and a laugh at my ego, and I said, I know that, the ego is jumping to these things, but clearly what the juice is in this email is I could still do work on my arrogance, my self-righteousness, my presumptuousness, and also my, what was the other one? Being condescending. Because I can be all of those things. believe me. And the arrogance was probably the one that turned out the most for me, and so I thought, well, that's obviously one I still need to work with. So I looked up the definition of arrogance, actually, and I came upon a psychologist that had written about arrogance and what arrogance is, and their definition of arrogance was that what an arrogant person's doing is they're attempting to gain self-respect, but they're doing it by putting somebody else down or even threatening somebody. And you don't gain self-respect that way, or even respect from another person doing that. People just think you're arrogant. So in our attempt to feel respectful, or to feel that we want respect and we're not being shown respect, we actually end up doing a behaviour that actually does the opposite of what it is that we want. So in many ways, arrogance is a plea for help because that person wants to feel respected. And often we find, or we seek respect in the things that we acquire. So we seek respect in the degrees that we get, in the qualifications that we get, in the knowledge that we talk about, the people we know, the things that we do. And it's a way that we get that feeling of I'm good enough, I'm worthy, I'm enough. So when I look at my arrogance and I look at when I'm being arrogant, the fear, going back into the first quote of Yoda, is simply the fear of not being good enough. And then from arrogance, condescension usually happens, because the condescending part is the arrogance doing the condescending in order to get the respect or gain the respect or gain the outcome. And the presumptuousness is just simply jumping into the anger and not maybe doing more thought or more research about the person and their background. And also the self-righteousness that's there because one feels the need to protect what one stands for, one believes. So all of those things were things that I had to confront within myself. And it brought me to the second quote of Yoda's, which is here as, when you look at the dark side, careful you must be, for the dark side looks back. And boy, oh boy, did the dark side look back at me. I got to see at least 4 things that I need to work on. And going into arrogance was a really tough one because it did bring up that sense of the self-doubt and the not being worthy enough. And this is what shadow work's about. It's about going to these difficult places within ourselves and dealing with this stuff that causes us to lash out and behave the way that we behave, which generally doesn't get us the results we want. It generally does the opposite, and it creates conflict, and then you end up with warring with people, and it's just over initially at the whole beginning of this scenario is simply a difference of opinion, philosophy, ideology, whatever. So that's an example of shadow work, an example of my process. So if you do get something that angers you, allow your ego to have its say, write it down, let your ego go there, and then see what you can see in that email that is exactly the same as if it's an email that you got, or whether it's a conflict that you've actually had with somebody. It's easier in an email because it's written down, you can spend time with it. If you're having a direct conflict with somebody, like you're speaking to them, person to person, it's much harder to do that because you're probably more likely going to jump into an ego response and an ego defense. And then afterwards go, oh, okay, yeah, that happened. So it is easier when it's in an email, for sure, to do this sort of stuff. So that's an example of that. Another example that this email brought up was that within Wicca, within all religions, there's always this disagreement about who's right, who's wrong, who's got the right to this and who's got the right to that. This happens in all religions. It happens in Christianity. Look at the Protestants and the Catholics. In Islam it happens with the Shia Muslims and the Sunni Muslims. It happens in Buddhism with the Theravada Buddhists and the Mahayana Buddhists. It happens everywhere. It's a human thing and it's an ego thing. So it's, I mean, and there's other things that may be in there to do with philosophy. People may feel that they're quite justified in their position, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with having a position that disagrees with another position. If you are a traditional Wiccan and you come from a traditional coven and you've gone through the traditional degrees, then that's what you've done, and that's great. However, Wicca's changed a lot and rolled with the times. It's moved incredibly. Even back in the beginning with Gerald Gardner, you know, people hived off and people formed different covens and different philosophies and different ways of doing things, till you end up with a lot of different styles of Wiccan practice. And not all of them adhere to the original degree system. Not all of them work that way. My first coven worked that way. My second coven didn't. And yet the people that were in that second coven had gone through a degree coven. And so as a result of that, the high priestess, who we hived off with, she just didn't feel it was relevant anymore. You could still go through the learnings and the experience without necessarily going through formal initiations. There's nothing wrong with doing that way. Some people work really, really well with a degree system and it suits them and it's a great way to go. Other people don't work so well with it. Other people have a more mystical way of working with things where it's a different type of process. I guess the trap for the ego is attaching one's worth to the degree. And that's a trap we all have to make sure that we don't fall into, because I've fallen into that trap too. I have looked down my nose at people who've started covens who were not even initiated ever into a coven ever. And I'm guilty of having looked down my nose at those people. And I had to confront that when I confronted myself with this email, that I too have been guilty of exactly the same thing. Because I thought that because I've been a coven initiated witch, that I've been initiated as a priestess in a Wiccan coven, that therefore I was more authorized to form a coven or be teaching than somebody who hadn't. And that's not necessarily true. There's a lot of different ways of learning this craft than formal Western hierarchical structures. And we need to understand that. So on that note, I will leave you peacefully. I am starting a shadow work course with the chakras, working with EFT as well, emotional freedom technique or tapping, to help release these sense of not being worthy enough, not being good enough, to stop us from behaving in ways that are just not helpful for us to behaving, and also to help us feel more helpful to ourselves and other people, and to just be happier, healthier people. If you are interested in doing the chakra shadow work course, it is called Wheels of Empowerment, and I will be releasing that hopefully on the 14th of April. So if you want to have you want to know more about that, do sign up for my newsletter, sign up for or any of my free information, such as how to start your witchcraft practice or spellcaster checklist. The links for all of those are in the description field below this video, and you can get on my mailing list as long as you tick the box to get more information from me. So if you like the video, hit the like button, share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you on the next video. Blessed be.